Good morning, everybody. I hope you are doing well and that you didn't have too much trouble with all of the storms. We're lucky on, I think, this side of town that it seems like power on this side of town was okay. I had power outage for about 22 hours, but it was worse last year. So fingers crossed that we don't have another huge storm. But yeah, getting the emails that Oak Grove and YB and Calero have a third day where they have no school. Um, that's crazy. But I don't know if you guys seen the pictures of that side of town. It's quite insane. Like by Oak Grove, there's like like those big wooden power poles, like 6 of them are down. And they had to be replaced. So we are a little bit blessed. But we are starting our February book club. We are reading The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. And I came across this book. When did I come across this book? Maybe late summer. I was in a bookstore browsing around. I was waiting for a friend of mine. We were going to coffee and I was browsing this bookstore and I came across this book. And it just seemed like kind of a lot of the stuff that we talk about in these weekly Zooms and a lot of what we deal with as educators and then of course as parents with our teens and all of their emotions and what is like normal teenage emotions and what's not. And so far, I don't know how you guys have been feeling about it. So far, I have not finished the book. I'm not going to lie. And I had said, okay, we're going to read chapters 1 and 2. And then yesterday I was like, oh, I barely started chapter 1. So I did a lot of reading yesterday. So far, I have actually really enjoyed the book. What I've enjoyed about it too, it's actually a pretty fast, easy read. I don't know what you guys have felt. It's not overly dense. So I personally have enjoyed that. But I have some guiding questions for us today. And so I wanted to start just kind of like, why I picked this book and why I think it would be good for us is kind of wrapped up in this first question, which is, what is it like for you when your teen expresses negative emotions? How would you describe your internal reaction? How do you tend to respond to your teen at these times? And I know for myself, like when they have negative emotions sadness, anger, anytime that they're basically not happy, it sucks. It's really difficult as a parent to see your child going through that. My son, and actually the chapter that we're going to finish talking about today, the chapter on gender, like I thought that was really great. I personally really resonate with that, with the differences between boys and girls, but my son is not great at communication. Like he like bottles it all up. He doesn't express his emotions. And so times where I know he's struggling with something and he doesn't want to talk about it, I really struggle with that. With my daughter, I could get her to like tell me more what was going on. I really struggle with getting my son to tell me what's going on. And so my hope with this book is that I'm going to like get some clues on how to help with my communication with him. Yvonne, Amy, anything you guys want to join in on
Yeah.
that?
I mean, having 3, actually my oldest teen is not a teen anymore. He's gonna be 21 this week, but still my kiddo. Negative emotions, I think my response is different depending on which kiddo it is. So like one of my sons who's had some pretty serious bouts of like depression and suicidal thoughts, I'm very much more triggered by him when I see him have negative emotions. My automatic thought is like, oh no, he's kind of going down that hole again. And the first chapter I really enjoyed because it's like negative emotions are part of life. Like we shouldn't be avoiding them. Like sometimes you just have to like get through them and embrace them, and it helps you mature and grow. And so for him, sorry, threw me off. so for him, I think I'm just a little bit more sensitive to it. Like, I don't want him to be sad. I don't want him to feel down, because my automatic reaction is like, it's going to go really, really poorly, or things are going to get worse. My younger one, when he has negative emotions, I think I get like a more like frustrated, like, I don't ask a lot from you. And this, so it just depends on which kiddo we're talking about. But it's uncomfortable. Like you said, it's like, I don't want my kids to be sad. Like, I feel like part of my job is to like help them and make life easier for them. And so when I see them down or sad, it just like, I want to fix it. I know I can't most of the time, but I want to fix it. And I don't like to see it. And I really liked the part where it talked about, that's how we mature, by going through those situations. So we don't want to be a snowplow parent where we're getting all the obstacles out of the way because they have to go through it. But I don't like it.
So and I didn't assign the introduction, so I don't know if you guys actually read the introduction, but in the introduction, it's talking about how like emotions are good. Teenagers we all as humans need to feel all the emotions. And it reminded me of the movie Inside Out, where like just going around like only like feeling happiness, but like no, to actually be a complete person, you have to feel all and experience all of the emotions at different points. And I think that that's really important to remember with dealing with our teenagers who can have like pretty extreme ups and downs just normally with their emotions, that's normal. And I thought in the introduction there was this part where they were talking about a society, like there's this collective feeling like that we're failing at wellness. And I feel like ever since, especially with the pandemic, there's such a focus on self-care and wellness. We now have a wellness center that Amy is sitting in. That like this is like such a big like thing in our society that we need to focus on wellness. And in it that I feel like that adds extra pressure that you should always be feeling okay. And that's not, I don't always feel okay. Like that's not how
I
things
think it was
work.
like helpful, even like as a clinician, it was super helpful. Like, my goal when students leave my office shouldn't be that they're feeling happy, right? It should be that they've processed their feelings, that they're growing through this. Ideally, I would like them to leave feeling happy, and sometimes they do. But it's like, one of the things I highlighted, it's like we've become so uneasy with psychological discomfort
Yeah.
and not acknowledging and normalizing the fact that, that's that's part of being human, is
Yeah.
ups and downs.
Yeah. When something, bad happens, like you're supposed to either be sad or angry depending on like what like that situation calls for. You're at times when you're in a stressful situation, you're actually supposed to feel stressed. I think there was one part where it talks about, this parent going to her and talking about the child that is like super nervous for a test. Well, that's normal. You're supposed to, when you're about to take a big test, you're supposed to feel nervous about that. Where it becomes um worrisome is if they don't like their emotions don't regulate normally afterwards, and they like stay in that emotion longer than the situation calls for. And I thought that that was a really great frame for mental health and like understanding mental health. I thought that would personally, like that was actually like you were saying, Yvonne, I thought that that was really helpful to me to like, when should I be concerned about something as a parent, and what is like, okay, like this is a normal thing that this situation calls for.
It was like, is their response or reaction like commensurate with the experience? Like, that's kind of the indicator of if they're doing okay or not. Like, if you bomb a test, you're failing your class, all those things, it's like, yeah, you should feel down. But if, your football team loses and you fall into a depression for 4 months, like, maybe that's not an appropriate response, or a healthy response, if you will. So I did like that. It felt like it almost like relieved pressure off of me to like fix everybody, because I get that like mom instinct even with my clients. It's like, okay, I want them to feel good and feel better, but really to just sit with that, like, okay, they're learning something, and eventually at some point in their life this will benefit them somehow. So
Okay, so my next question, and I'm excited about this next question because I actually really liked this part of this was in chapter How might the information in this chapter on hot and cold reasoning change how you talk with your teen about risky situations? And I loved her story of, what did she call it? The skidding, where like they were like on the road and
I
like
never even heard of that.
well, we're not from Colorado where there's snow. So apparently that's not something we ever experienced, but it sounded terrifying. And as an adult, I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. What are you doing? But I could totally see teenagers, and even I don't know if I would do that as a teenager. I've never been like a high risk person, but I am
Oh.
not going to share with you as a group. I'm going to keep that inside myself. The things that I've did as a teenager that I look back on and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Like that.
Yeah. And for those of you that didn't read the book, basically what she's describing is her kiddo and the teenage friends. What they do is they hold on to the bumper of a car when there's ice on the ground, and their friends drive with them holding on to the bumper, and they hold on and eventually fall off and, hopefully don't get hurt. And so it was one of the things that the kiddo did, which was like her bad behavior. So
Yeah.
just in case you didn't read that.
And so, and what she's saying with that is like, and she says like, and that's why she calls it hot and cold reasoning, like in the cold light of day. Like if you talk to your teenager, they will say, well, of course, that's the stupidest thing in the world, and we shouldn't do that. Like there's such a risk of injury. And so like outside of the immediate, outside of the situation where they're looking at it realistically, they'll be like, no, that's unreasonable and I won't do that. But when they're in the situation, the hot situation where all like the emotions and the social like pressures and everything, are they going to make the same choices? And so I thought her recommendations on how to talk to your teenagers, and like that's some of the stuff that we've talked in recent weeks. We talk about um, talking to your child about consent. And when we talk about like, the pressures of drugs and alcohol, like in like the cold reasoning, they're not in the moment. They're going to be like, yeah, no, of course I'm not going to do that. Of course I'm going to. But practicing with them about, okay, you're in the situation. What are things that you can say? What are things that, like let's role play a little bit about like, all right, you're at a party and somebody offers you drugs. What are you going to say? And what is your excuse going to be? My daughter and I had that, where if she was in a situation where she felt uncomfortable, like we had practiced things that she could say, we had practiced like things that she could text to me, and that I would like come and like help her out. And so that I would know that she was in a situation that she needed help. And so I think that's a really great thing to do with your teenager to help prepare them for risky situations, because you can talk to your teen about, and they'll agree with you and be like, yes, absolutely. Like that's how I should behave. That's what would be smart to do. But when they're like with all of their teen emotions and with their friends and like there's all this stuff going on, they need to be prepared for that too. I don't know if anybody else has any comments about that.
No, actually, I really like that section because even like thinking back as a teenager, if I would have thought ahead of time and had an escape plan for certain things, or had some sort of backup plan, I would have probably not engaged in some of the more risky behaviors that I did. But I like that. It's like your kid isn't necessarily making bad decisions. Maybe they're just like they're bad at planning, right? And so I think it kind of separates the kiddo and the behavior. It's like they know what's right and wrong, but then you have to factor in those components of like peer pressure and wanting to experience new things and all those things. I think it's just like finding that balance and like you said, practicing role playing, figuring out like, hey, if I don't want to drink but I'm feeling really pressured, what are the things I can say to my friends so that I don't feel stupid? And one of the examples was like, you can say like, hey, I'm taking some medication right now that I can't mix with alcohol. Like, even if it's not true, it's okay as long as you have like a safety out. And if you know yourself well enough to know that like, I don't want to look stupid in front of my friends, then you definitely want to have some sort of plan so that you don't have to necessarily look weak or stupid in front of your friends.
Right.
You can still say no with that plan was that you had ahead of time. So, but I wonder like how many poor decisions prior to being hot, environment, would kids have been like, no way, absolutely not. When I, like you were saying, like things think that I did, I would have never done that. And how did I decide, at what point did I switch and be like, okay, I'm going to do that anyways? And
Yeah.
what could I have done to prevent those kind of things? And
And
I'm grateful to have three boys.
And I can't speak as a parent of teens because I still have toddlers, although it's funny reading this because I still find like parallels as a parent of a toddler. But working with teenagers, we talk a lot about role playing and what kinds of things could you say to your friends in that situation? Because the last thing teenagers want is to look stupid in front of their friends, right? So practicing that and having some like ready-made excuses is really helpful.
it is really helpful. Yeah, so I think that's a great thing to do with your teen. So Leah says in the chat, yes, we need to anticipate worse scenarios in their teenage life and prepare them for situations like that. One-on-one advice is very important. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go on to our next question, which is, this is where we have to be, a little truthful as parents and things that we've tried to do to shield our kids. Have there been times where you went out of your way to try to prevent the possibility your teen would experience emotional distress? If so, would you take the same approach if a similar situation presented itself again? Why or why not? And I was really trying to think of a time where I've shielded my kids from something. And I struggled with this. I struggled with it. I mean, and maybe that I'm too close to the situation with my mom being real sick and dying, but I don't think I really was like very upfront about everything that was going on with her. Definitely, I think I probably shielded, especially my son. I probably shielded because he was younger. Ooh, thank you, son.
Yeah.
One thing that I did come to mind, though my daughter wasn't a teenager when this happened, when she was about 8 or 9, I think she was probably 9 when it happened, but when she was like about 7 or 8, she'd been in gymnastics. And then about 6 months after she stopped doing gymnastics, this was tragic. Her gymnastics teacher who was in high school when she took gymnastics and then was in college, died in a drive-by shooting. Was terrible. I know, awful thing that happened. And so it was in the news, and so that's how I found out about it, because it was on the news. And so I didn't tell my daughter about it. She was really young. She wasn't in gymnastics anymore. And so I probably, if she had still been in gymnastics and like obviously her teacher is gone, I would have said something, but I didn't say anything. And then she later found out about it. She's like, "Oh my God, Mom, you know what happened?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I know. I've known for about a year. I just didn't tell you." So, but I don't honestly know in that situation if I would change how I handle it. I didn't feel at the time that that was something I needed to talk to her about.
Especially that's so tragic. It's like you don't want to watch your kid go through that, but then of course they're going to eventually find out, right?
Right.
That's a tough one. I don't have, mine isn't as tragic, thank God. But
That was an extreme. That was an extreme
no,
example.
it's real though. Mine is kind of silly, and I don't know why this one popped up for me. And it was years and years ago, because it was when we were buying our kids iPod touches. So that's how long ago. My kid was in third grade, and he had worked so hard to save money to buy this iPod touch. And he finally gets it. We get it, and he's listening on it, and he's putting music on it and all this stuff. And he asks us, he's like, "Can I take it on a field trip?" And I said, "You could break it. Something could happen. We don't have a case for it yet. I don't recommend it. You shouldn't do it, blah, blah, blah." So he takes it, and he's on his field trip. And not only does he drop it, but he drops it and steps on it, and it's done. Like, it's not even like salvageable, right? And so I had warned him, right? I'm like, you should not. And so when he gets home, he is in tears. He's so upset. He's so disappointed in himself. Like, he's just like sinking further and further. So what does mommy do? We go buy another one. And my mom kept saying, like, he has to learn. You told him. And the heartbreak was so real. And like, he had saved and I just watched him work. I could not watch it. In hindsight, would I have still done that? Probably. Was it the right thing? No, but I felt like he had suffered enough. Like it was like really bad. I don't know, but it was just one of those moments where I was like, I can't watch this. I can't. It's so silly, but it was so meaningful to him at that time. It just broke my heart. And I did the thing that I would not recommend parents do, where you bail them out or save them and not let them experience that heartache. So I don't know why that came to mind, but
not gonna lie, I feel like I totally set you up with this question because this whole question reminded me of the book we read last year, The Gift of Failure, and that you have to let your child fail and go through bad things so that they can learn from it.
it
And
hurts.
so, yeah, I think it's really tough though. It's really, when
my eyes are
going
watering thinking of his sadness like 15 years later.
I think, yeah, but it's really like when your child, especially when I feel like when they're teenagers, because a lot of times teenage emotions, like that situation, like your son being upset about that, that's totally understandable. But sometimes with teenagers, they have emotions and they're dealing with stuff, and it's hard for us to understand. Like it's hard for us to relate to what they're feeling. And I think that oh, we lost Yvonne. I told her that she shouldn't have bought the iPad for her son and she dropped out. um, she'll come back. There you are. I want to kind of, I didn't have a question about this, but in this chapter, there was a really great, I thought, great definition of trauma.
Mhm.
And I want to say it's so I'll read to you. This is on page 21. Trauma occurs when an individual suffers greater emotional stress than that person can find a way to tolerate. And so I kind of wanted to get your perspective, both Amy and Yvonne, as you know, our social workers and the experts in this field, about how you guys felt with that. Because I feel like trauma is a word that's thrown around a lot now. That it's like something that's kind of, I don't want to say trendy, but almost it's trendy to talk about trauma, and it is thrown around a lot. So what do you guys think?
I absolutely agree. I think just on the surface, I think a lot of people now nickname any painful experience as trauma, right? And I think the book did a really good job of saying like everyone goes through painful experiences in their life, right? But it's not necessarily the painful experience itself, it's how you emotionally respond to it. And it gave a couple really good examples of two people going through the exact same situation, and one person comes out with trauma and the other one just had a very negative experience.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah.
100%.
And I think that's important for us to remember, like, we all are going to have negative experiences, and even negative experiences, they're going to shape us and they're going to be impactful on us, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have lasting trauma from it. And so I think I think as parents, we try too hard to shield our kids from bad situations. And obviously you want to protect them. You don't want terrible things to happen to them, but they're going to have a teacher that they don't like. You know, they're going to have a class that they're really going to struggle with. They're going to have a girlfriend or boyfriend break up with them. They're going to get in fights with their friends. Like, this is all stuff that is going to happen to them. And it's actually important that it does happen to them. It's going to help develop their maturity and how they know how to cope with situations as an adult. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that. No. All right, let's move on to chapter 2, which is I found.
I was just gonna say, you reflecting on like the intensity of feeling your kid's pain and heartbreak and all those things. And I really try to remember that, like when I'm working with students and I have to call families of just like, yeah, I know firsthand, like that feeling of, man, you put everything into this kiddo, you want everything good for them, and bad things are going to happen. And how do we help them be equipped to handle those bad things? And it's by not snow plowing and not eliminating all of the obstacles, but letting them experience that, and learning how resilient we are and how resilient teenagers are. Man, they go through so much more than I ever went as a teenager, like whatever I went through, and they thrive through it, and they get through it. And I tell kids, like, one of the last things I always say in sessions is like, you can do really hard things. You're doing really hard things, and you're going to continue to do really hard things, and you're still here, and I'm really happy.
I'm going to share, before we move on to, well, actually, maybe this kind of is a lead into the next chapter about gender and how my son dealt with the situation. So a couple of months ago, our dog chewed a hole in his pants. But like right in like, like the butt portion of his pants where like you don't want to have a hole. Did not notice this going to school. And so he was in his English class and this girl was like, dude, you have a hole in your pants. And poor Nathan like had to go through the whole day with this hole in his pants, and he was embarrassed. I mean, and then he like, and I was about to say like, oh, but he got over it. It wasn't traumatizing, because, we throw that word around, traumatizing, that, but maybe because like, as this like chapter 2 talked about, boys tend to distract themselves and hide their emotions. So I don't know, maybe this is something he's still dwelling on, and he's, just not talking about it. And he's like wrapped up in his video games and just not thinking about it. But when I started reading this chapter and she says, boys, I want to read the exact, it was in the beginning, and then she kind of like debunks it. But at the beginning, I was like, yes, those are my kids, because I have a daughter and I have a son. And so this is the top of page 38. Because when it comes to managing emotional distress, boys are more likely to turn to distraction and girls are more likely to turn to discussion. And as my experience as a parent of having children with both genders, that is exactly how my kids deal with stuff. My daughter wants to talk about it, and my son wants to like go play his video games or play with his Legos and like do something else, and like, don't talk to him, don't bother him. So I'm curious in what your guys' thoughts. And so our next question is what's your sense of how gender socialization has influenced your teens' expression of emotion? And how, like, now, Yvonne, you have all boys. Amy, do you have a boy and a girl, or both?
Yes, I have a boy and a girl.
Okay, so I'm curious, like, how and like raising, and I had to like really think about this, and I don't know, maybe I probably need to do some more self-reflection, because like reading this, I was like, nah, I'm good, because of course I'm the perfect parent. I never do anything wrong. But I was thinking about my husband and how my husband has dealt with my kids' emotions. And especially, I thought this was really interesting when they talked about like girls and how like as a society, we don't handle girls' anger very well, and that's not seen as something that's acceptable. I actually, like this morning, I was looking at my phone and I saw a meme of this woman, and it was like this wish, like this stone cold face and how women express emotion. She just got this like stone cold look on her face. And I was like, oh, that like ties in with what we're talking about today. But I was thinking about my husband and how he has handled my children's emotions. And when my daughter was little and she was angry, like that would like set my husband off, and he like couldn't handle her anger, but could handle her sadness. And with my son, he tends to react better to my son's anger, but can't handle it when my son's sad. And I just like thought like I had like, it was like, oh, huh, that's really interesting. So,
ooh, yeah.
what are your thoughts? And of course, anybody in the chat, you guys can join in or raise your hand.
I am much more comfortable with my kids' anger than sadness. It really bothers me when they're sad. I get I go down the rabbit hole of like worry, like, is this like depression? Like what's happening? But I think my husband and I are very different. And I think being like a social worker makes it different because I want my kids to talk about it. And my husband is just not that way. And so there's kind of been this weird dynamic where, you know, they can talk to me, not so much my husband, that kind of stuff. But I really, really try to like validate their feelings and like normalize talking about stuff. And, you know, they'll always tell me like, stop mom with the, you know, psychobabble and, you know, stop trying to social work me and all that stuff. But I think they know and they're comfortable sharing feelings, but not those deep sadness feelings. And that's what gets me. Just like I worry when they're silent.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just the gender thing. Like maybe that's, you know, they move on, they distract, they do all these things. And I'm like, we need to talk about it. And maybe they don't need to talk about it. I don't know. I just that's my comfort. It's like, you know, that's what my whole career is surrounded around, talking, right? And my kids are like silent. And I'm like, this is really frightening for me. I need you to say something. Just tell me you're okay. You know.
Amy, I'm curious because your kids are a lot younger, what you have seen.
I haven't really reflected on this question. So now I'm like running through scenarios in my head and then also going towards like the gender socialization piece. Well, but it also doesn't help that I'm a social worker because we're doing a lot of like naming emotions and talking about emotions. Granted, my kids are 2 and 3 years old. But you're right. My husband doesn't do that necessarily in conversations with both of them. And then I also think of like my husband's friend group. Like when they all get together, do they discuss being sad or angry or any emotions that they're experiencing? I don't think so. I think they hang out and they play games and they watch football and golf. Whereas like when I hang out with my girlfriends, I'm talking about what's been going on in my life and the emotions associated with it. So I really do think it's like a socialization piece, like lifelong.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the chat, Rochelle says, very true. When a female gets angry, she's called crazy. When males are angry, it's normal. I think definitely as a society, I think that that's true. Rupert says, depends if I cause the sadness or anger and how I approach them. Sometimes I just offer a hug. And Leah says, mothers are the nurturers and fathers are always logical. Mothers understand more the emotional side of our children. Not as a group, but men do have 1 to 2 friends that they confide in. I don't know. Do all men do that? I don't know. I don't know if my husband has somebody that he's like sparing his soul to.
He has to have one. He has to have one
Rupert.
person. Or he doesn't have friends.
Sharon, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to add that what I learned from my experience, and I have only one kid, and is that when she came into high school or just the last year post-COVID, she would get very angry on the littlest of things. And my earlier reaction used to be like, deal with it then, or, kind of let her know what she's doing is not right, and it wasn't working. So I don't know, I read a book or someone mentioned it to me. I can't recollect that. But I think the best reaction is not to give any reaction at that time. And when they are more calmer, then appeal to their emotions. So I would like talk to her and say that what you said to me really hurt me and made me really sad, or whatever, exactly what it made me feel. And then over a period of time, I noticed that that made more sense to her. Instead of me saying what you did was right or wrong, that's a given that that reaction is wrong. But how it made the other person feel is what probably appealing to her emotional side made a lot of difference. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that kind of leads us into our next question, which is about like emotions and anger. And so this question is loaded. And first off, I want to admit to all of you, I did not write these questions. I found for this book on the internet discussion questions. So I don't want you guys to give me credit for writing these questions because I found them. They were discussion questions out there in the world. So how does your teen express anger? Could they comfortably share feelings of vulnerability? Do gender roles influence how the adults in your home express and respond to emotions? If you are raising a teen who belongs to a marginalized group, how do you think that experience has shaped your teen's emotional life? Like there's a lot there. And I think like we said, you know, as society, I think it's easier for boys to be angry. Um, I think it's easier for girls to express sadness. Um, I think that, you know, that's just, you know, we can talk a lot about toxic masculinity, and how that's just the norm. I don't know how much you guys follow the whole Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing. But I've become, well, I'm a football fan, obviously, but I've become big fans of the Kelce brothers, and I listen to their podcast every week. And one thing I love about them is they cry all of the time. Those two men are criers, and that's actually a joke in their family that Kelce men cry. And I think that's great, and I think that that's a great role models for our boys, that it's okay to cry. Like it's okay to have emotions that are not just anger.
No, I just had this like thought, and this is like, you know, we talk about modeling our behaviors, right? And so I'm comfortable, like if my husband gets angry, like he just gets angry. I have a this is a confession time, so please don't judge me, but I just realized this, like when my husband is expressing these kind of more vulnerable emotions, like I hurt his feelings or made him sad, my go-to response is stop being dramatic. Oh, and like I say that and I feel that and I say it in front of my children. So in that moment, I see Rupert, I know you're judging, stop. I'm confessing. No, I didn't even realize it until we're talking about this. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I drama, like, you know, because I always think of my husband's kind of like really low key and low maintenance. So when he starts to have all these feelings, I'm like, I guess kind of annoyed by them. And I think it has to do with just that stereotype of like, you're supposed to be the rock and the solid one and all these things. And like, here I am talking the talk of like, oh, I want boys to feel like they can have these emotions, but I've kind of set this tone. I feel terrible. And so in the same way, like a woman is angry, oh, she's crazy or she's drama or it's that time of the month or whatever, right? And but then I have that on the flip side and I did not even acknowledge it. And now I feel terrible. So I'm going to start to reflect on that. And that's the end of my confession.
Yeah. As Michelle says, they say there's usually another emotion behind the anger, that like, I'm assuming, Michelle, you mean with men are expressing anger, that's because that's the safe emotion for them to express, but there's usually something else going on. And I can definitely, like, my husband a couple weeks ago was like, not really angry, but like irritated and frustrated with our son. And I can, like, I know, like he was just worried, but how it was coming out was anger and frustration.
Mhm.
But I know he wasn't actually angry. He was just concerned and worried about him. So,
Interesting.
Can I add something?
yes, Rupert, you.
I just want to add that sometimes, and especially because I'm a bigger guy, that anger could be, or even an emotion could be used as I'm being aggressive
Mm-hmm.
when I'm just passionate about what I'm speaking on. And if I feel attacked because I sound a certain way or I look a certain way when I'm being passionate about something, it's automatically, Dad, stop being aggressive. And it's like, oh, you yell when you get, and it's like, no, my voice is louder or the inflection of my voice is different than when you do it. You squeal when you start yelling, and I don't squeal, I can't. And it's a little different. I just wanted to add that sometimes we're just being very passionate about what it is.
Yeah.
And then the kids can get scared, right? Because if I ever raise my voice or anything like that, it's not necessarily anger, it's could be that concern. There's a lot of different things, but how like immediately my own children can shut down because they get immediately afraid and they don't want it. They think the dialogue can't happen anymore because
Yeah.
of observed aggression when it's not. But that's
That's
something
it.
that I
That's
could probably work on too when
really
how I
interesting.
approach, um, because I can listen more as instead of talking over and yelling. but it's not aggression. I'm not gonna hit anybody, I swear.
Yeah, and I think that's like being male, and like you said, like if you're bigger, if you've got a lower voice, automatically it's intimidating for other people. So right, you don't have the same freedom to express. When I yell at the kids, they think it's funny. When my husband yells at the kids, it's scary. And it's just the difference of our height, of our tone, of our, and
I
yeah,
think
definitely.
also because it's kind of the opposite in my family. My husband is more naturally just a yeller. His voice is like actually fairly loud, and like he just is more of a like he gets frustrated and like we'll just do that. Whereas I don't, I tend to be much more even keel. And so it's kind of a joke in my family that if mom gets mad, watch out. That like everybody's like, oh no, because I don't I very rarely will get angry about stuff. Um and um so but I mean I think I'd like to touch on the part if you're raising a teenager with a margin that belongs to a marginalized group and like the different rules for that. Because I think that that's very true in our society. That's not really obviously as a white woman that I can speak on. But I don't know if anybody in the chat wants to share and just like the struggles with that. And I mean, I think we all can acknowledge just the unfairness of what's out there and what we have to deal with. Sean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I saw you took your you put
I
your
did.
camera on.
I was looking for the hand button, but I couldn't find it. Yeah, so thank you. I love these calls, by the way. Thank you so
Good.
much for us. Um, so yeah, my daughter, obviously African American, she grew up around this neighborhood. She went to Cherrywood, she went to Sierramont. And she in her within her social group, she's always been kind of the only one, right? The only Black female or the only Black in the group. And she did actually experience some bullying in elementary school. So for the most part, it's been great. I mean, she's had a great mix of friends, all colors, all shapes, sizes. It's been a beautiful rainbow for the most part.
Right.
But she has been the only one, and that can be lonely sometimes. Even if you have a lot of friends around you that are different colors and sizes, if you don't have one that looks like you, it's just different, right? So she was bullied a little bit in elementary school by her Asian friend. And I knew something was wrong with my daughter. This was like early on, and I asked her, "What's going on? Why are you always seeming sad the last couple of months, couple of weeks?" And she's like, "I don't like to play with dirt." I said, "Why are you playing with dirt?" She said, "Well, when we're picking flowers, Destiny tells me you do the dirt, you do the dirt, and everyone else did the flowers." So she would go through little things like that, and it carried on for a little bit to where I had to call the mom and have a talk with the mom. And thank God for that mom. That mom said, "Hell no, we're not doing this." We got together, we got the girls together, and the girl, I don't blame Destiny. She's a little girl, but I do think she singled her out because of her color. And it's sad because she's not taught that, but that's what she sees. That's what society kind of depicts sometimes. So I think, to answer your question, I know I'm getting around to your question. I think it has shaped her. She's probably a little more insecure than she should be because of that. And I think she feels like she has to do more of fitting in. And I can relate to that too, because I've had to do a lot of that too. You have to fit in.
Yeah.
So yeah, but she's okay. She's okay for the most part.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your experience.
Sure.
I really appreciate that. I don't know if anybody else has any comments. We're coming up to the end, so I want to jump to our last question, which we've been kind of touching on this, but let's talk about how has becoming a teenager impacted your teen's self-esteem? And what part of the traditional, perhaps non-traditional gender categories played in your teen's emerging identity and sense of self-worth? I My son is 14. He's a freshman in high school. And so I feel like he's too young still for me to really like be able to say like how he's developing as a teenager. He's adjusted to high school a lot better than I thought he was going to. He is somebody that he's got pretty strong self-esteem and doesn't really seem to care all that much if he's different than anybody else. I mean, he's got his long, messy hair. He doesn't care. He's always been kind of okay with not fitting the norm. My daughter, though, was much more, like I think about her in like the 5th grade and the way she was, and she was goofy and awkward in the 5th grade. She went to high school. Yeah, she kind of conformed to your typical high school girl, caring about high school girl stuff. And so I think it's kind of an interesting, mix. Last night we had our incoming freshman night, and it was interesting to see the 8th graders walking around the hallways because they look different than the high school kids. They're definitely more goofy and awkward. And then when they come into high school, they like kind of shift and like they like shift into the cool high school kid. And so it's an interesting time. I don't know. Yvonne, have you noticed anything with self-esteem with your teenagers?
You know what the biggest influence on my boys is right now, honestly, is their skin. Like just that awareness they look like, and acne and that kind of stuff that's been in. I would say just recently they're caring about appearance and getting haircuts and just that kind of thing. So I know we kind of think of that as like a girl thing of like being worried about how you look and all stuff, but it really, I think that's a big piece of their self-esteem right now. I don't know how much like one of my kiddos, how he does in school for him is like he really takes that as like who he is. So he takes his schoolwork really seriously, and that's kind of how he identifies as like being a good student. So I know that when he's not doing as good as he should, that impacts how he feels about himself overall. And so one of the things I always really try to like reiterate with the kids, my kids and my clients, is like there's so many parts of you that make you, right? There's you're kind of this being that consists of like grades and family and personality and dreams and likes and all these different things, and they're all equally important. So when one of those things may be failing a little bit, you have all these other parts of you that make you who you are. And so I really try, like, I tell my son, like, you're athletic and you're really nice to people, and you care about others, and you're helpful and all these things. And it's like, I know that doesn't make you feel better about what's going on with your skin right now, but just know that there's so many other factors that make up who you are. And so, but yeah, I think being a mom of boys, I didn't anticipate that piece of them feeling insecure about the way they look. I just assumed that's just like a girl thing, if you will. So that's tough. It's tough to watch because it's like, I know you're perfect and beautiful, but you don't feel that way. And that is hard to watch.
Yeah, my son made a comment to me several years ago, like several months ago, and he's like, "Oh, well, I'm ugly," and I'm like, "No, you're not." I mean, like in my head, I'm like, "Well, yeah, you're 14. You're going through a very awkward phase. You'll grow out of it. Like it'll be okay." Like, but like he had like, I had like never like where he had like looked in the mirror. And I was like, "No, I'm not attractive," and I was like, "Whoa, that's not true." And it made me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I wonder for like teenage boys, like what impacts their self-esteem the most? Like is it's got to be their outward appearance is my assumption. That's my assumption, but yeah,
Rupert, do you want to give us any insight into the teenage boy mind?
For boys, it's more they teach you what you can't see. So if it's not necessarily a manhood thing, but it's like, do you have hair there? Like if you're changing in the locker room and you don't have armpit hair, and all the other kids around you do, those are the little things. I'm like, one kid might get pimples and the other kid has a beard, and it's like some kids are like naturally muscular, and other kids are scrawny, like naturally they have to eat or take stuff to get a little bit bigger. So it's kind of
That's
one of those
true.
things where you're kind
It's
of
interesting
competitive
to say
with your
that.
height, your shoe
Yeah.
size.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because with girls go through puberty mostly in middle school. By the time they get to high school, most of them have gone through and they've developed, and they don't all look the same.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Whereas
how we
boys in
develop, you
high
can't really see
school,
it.
we have boys, we see it all the time. Like we see, like, I'm walking, like, you have one boy that looks like he's like 22 years old, but he's 14. And then you have another one that looks like literally they're 8, and you're like, are they sneaking in? Are they supposed to be here? There's no way they're old enough for high school. And like, that's a wide difference in just, boys going through puberty, because they do that a little bit later.
Yeah. Thank you, Rupert, for the male perspective, because I would have never even thought
I know, that was
like shoe
good.
size, hair growth, and size, and
Okay.
Okay, so a couple of comments I'm going to do in the chat, read real quick, and then we'll be finished for today. Michelle says, my daughter is more concerned with how people see her and the way she looks, even though she doesn't know them. She's very self-critical. My son, not so much anymore. I think girls do tend to be a little bit, and we see that with the influence of social media. Like, they've done studies, and that girls, are much more likely. We talked about that when we talked about social media. Girls are much more likely to compare themselves to images they see on social media. So definitely true. And then AL says, hi, Sean and everyone. I read the book by Baratunde Thurston, How to Be Black, and it helped me understand how he faced discrimination while growing up. It helped me understand what kind of racism he faced, and I developed a much more empathy after reading this book. What I did not know and learned that there is also discrimination between African Americans. This book expanded my world. Thank you. You guys always give me great. I have this like running list of book recommendations. So thank you. I'm gonna put that one on my list.
Thank you. And so true about the, black on black discrimination. I'm sure it happens across all cultures, but it's definitely prevalent.
I think you're right. I think that it doesn't, I think within every single culture, there's
Yeah.
some sort of discrimination.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. This was such a great conversation. I'm so excited that you guys are joining and we're reading this, and this was a great way to start off. So just to give you guys a game plan so that you can plan out your reading. So we have 2 more Wednesdays in February because we have a week off in February, which obviously we're not going to be meeting during that week. So for next week, what we're going to do is we're going to read chapter 3 for next week. So just one chapter. And so there's only 5 chapters in the book. So next week we'll discuss chapter 3, and then because we'll have 2 weeks in between, the last Wednesday in February, which is February 28th, we'll discuss chapters 4 and 5. Okay. So thank you so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and hopefully today we're gonna have rain, but then hopefully we have sunny skies for the next couple of days. I work out on Wednesday mornings with a personal trainer, and she was like, and we were talking about the power outages. She's like, oh, I hope we don't have a power outage for the Super Bowl. And I was like, you're gonna give me a panic attack. I'm like, that. Talk about trauma. I don't know if I would get over that one. So fingers crossed that we're gonna like have sun and like there's gonna be no problems. All right, everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful week. Have great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you.